Michelle Donovan.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Donovan, and I've been with Google's People Operations team for 10 years now, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk with you about making managers awesome. So let's get started. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about best practices. And I want to start in this way because within the field of human resources, best practices have become very popular. And in the best case, a best practice can be sort of a source of inspiration, something that's working at one company that you want to think about adopting at your own company. But in the worst case, a best practice can be something that happens to work narrowly in one company that another company just sort of picks up and blindly follows. And at Google, we don't believe in best practices. At Google, we believe in data. And this is a theme you'll hear over and over in the summit. And so when it comes to a product decision, or a sales decision, or even a decision about our own people, we think all of these decisions should be based on data and analytics. And I know earlier today, you heard from Prasad Sethi. He talked about making work better. And today, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about a project that I worked on with Prasad and his team, and it was focused on managers. And together we set out to ask two simple questions. Number one, do managers matter at all? You heard this morning Prasad hint a little bit that we weren't sure whether or not managers matter, and we wanted to turn to the data and find out. And the second question we had, if they do matter, what is it that our best managers are doing? And it was in hopes that if we learned something from our best managers, we could train the rest of our managers. So before I get into the research project, I want to share two pieces of context with you. The first context is around 10x. So our co-founder, Larry Page, talks to us about thinking 10x. He likes to say, you should think 10x and not 10%. And what he means by that is to make giant progress, you need to take giant 10x leaps forward, and not just like little baby 10x incremental improvements. And so when you think about self-driving cars or balloon-fueled internet, those 10x leaps seem really obvious. But what does 10x look like on the people side? And we started wondering, maybe 10x on the people side is all about the manager. Because if you think about it, if we could measurably improve our thousands of managers at Google, those managers would have a significant impact on the tens of thousands of Googlers that they manage. And that's 10x. The other piece of context that I want to share with you is a little bit of history about managers at Google. So this morning, Prasad Sethi hinted at a little bit when he said, sometimes our engineers think that our managers are these middling bureaucrats. And so we have historically had our managers, our Googlers, question the value of managers. And historically, we like to say, the engineers would say, in the best case scenario, my manager is a bit of a nuisance. And in the worst case scenario, some of our engineers would say, I think my manager is actively trying to undermine me. They were really skeptical about managers. And in fact, when we were just a few hundred people at Google, our co-founders, Larry and Sergey, were so sick of the complaints that they said enough, and they got rid of all our managers. They got rid of them. And that lasted for a few weeks, basically. It was a disaster because everything started escalating to Larry. So vacation requests, interpersonal problems, the works. It didn't work. And so Larry finally relented, and he reinstated the managers. And I share this story with you, A, because it's true, but B, because it gives you an idea of the context of why we'd want to set out on this research project in the first place. And so we had that question, do managers matter? And so the first thing that we did in the research project is we had to figure out who are the best managers at Google and who are the worst ones. And we did that based on two data sources. The first data source was a performance review rating. And so this is your management chain's look down at how effective that manager is. And you can see performance reviews plotted along the x-axis. So managers with really high ratings are on the right. The second data source that we looked at was the team's view of the manager. And we got this from a survey that the team filled out about their manager. You can see that plotted on the y-axis. So teams that were very favorable about their managers, those managers are at the top. And so you can see our top managers in the upper right. Top performance ratings, top survey scores. The worst managers are down on the left. Now, one interesting finding about this chart is that we saw managers in the other quadrants. So if you look in the lower right, you can see what we called perf favoring managers. These are managers with very high performance ratings, but their own teams don't think very highly of them. And when we dug in here, what we found is oftentimes these were managers who were cranking towards really tough deadlines and burning out the teams. So although the managers loved them, their own teams were very unhappy. In the other quadrant, we have team favoring managers. So these are managers where their own team loves them, but their managers aren't so sure. And what we found when we dug in here is that oftentimes managers in this bucket were trying to be the team's best friend. So the team loved them, but they weren't delivering on results. So now that we understand the quadrants, I really want to focus you in on the best and the worst. So when we picked the best managers, we picked managers who were in the top 25% of that performance rating and of that survey. So the upper quartile. And on the bottom, it was the bottom quartile. And our next step was to study the differences, to figure out, does it really matter if you have a manager who's in that best bucket? And we found out it matters a lot. We found out that your manager at Google is the single biggest driver of your happiness at Google. We found out that if you have a manager in that best bucket, those managers have teams with lower turnover rates, their teams report they're more productive, they're more innovative, and they're happier across the board. And these findings held across functions, across jobs, any way we'd cut it. Once we knew that, okay, managers matter. What is it that that best group of managers is doing? So again, we turned to the data. And we read through stacks of performance reviews. We read through survey comments. One analysis that we conducted is called double-blind interviews. So in a double-blind interview, I, the interviewer, don't know whether the manager that I'm interviewing is a best or worst. And that manager doesn't know either. We ask them the same sets of questions. How do you spend your time? What do you focus on? And then we go and analyze the results. And what we found is those best managers are doing things differently. And one example is that our best managers were much more likely to have one-on-ones. So those best managers were much more likely to schedule one-on-one meetings with their teammates. And what that means is they would sit down with their reports, usually about once a week, and talk about the work. What's going well? What's not going well? What can you do about it? What can I, as your manager, do to help you with that? The worst managers just weren't as likely to do that. And that's a really simple thing that we now can teach all our new managers. As soon as you become a manager, set up those one-on-ones. And by the way, here's a guide for what a good one-on-one looks like. So we've analyzed all this data. We've looked at all these results. And to recap, it was survey comments, performance reviews, those double-blind interviews. And we ran what we call qualitative data analyses. And from all that data, 8 attributes of our managers very clearly emerged. And they're posted here. We found that our best managers are doing these things. They're great coaches, they empower their team, they express interest, and so on. Oftentimes, when I show people this list, they say, it's kind of straightforward. It's even kind of simple. And I agree. The thing that makes this list really compelling for us is it's based on our data, that it's based on our managers. And we have such a respect for data at Google that it's a very compelling list for our managers. And so one thing to point out about the list, they are in order. So one of the most important things that our best managers are doing is coaching their teams. You might notice that technical skills is on the list, but it's last. It's number 8. And so what we found is that technical skills are important because they help a manager advise the team. It's kind of tough to advise if you don't have some domain expertise to advise them. But it's not the most important thing. The softer skills, the coaching, the communicating, those are much more important when it comes to our best managers and what they do and what they spend their time on. So technical skills is on the list, but it's not number 1. So one of the most powerful things about this project was not the research itself, but what we did with the research. So what we've done with the findings is we've woven them into every aspect of the manager lifecycle. What you're looking at here is a manager feedback survey report. And so what we do is every 6 months, we very simply ask the team, how's your manager doing on these 8 attributes? The survey is very short, takes about 5 minutes. It's anonymous, so we encourage the teams to be candid. And it's for developmental purposes only. So what that means is it's not tied to their performance review at all. We give the reports to the managers if at least 3 of their team members respond. And we say, this is for you. This is for you to think about how you're doing on these 8 attributes, which we know are important. And it's for you to think about where you might want to improve. When we give these reports, we do a few things to help the managers. One of the things we do is we strongly encourage them to share the report with their team. And we give them a discussion guide to help with that. So we say, look, be a role model. Talk about the growth mindset. Tell them everybody's working on something. I heard you. I see in my report I'm doing great on coaching and communicating, but not so great on micromanaging. So here's what I'm going to try, and give me feedback. In the same way that I give you feedback, you give me feedback. And we give them discussion guides to help with that. The second thing we do is we try to make it easy for them to take action to improve. So we tell them, if you score low on coaching, here's a course you can take to improve on coaching. Here's an article you can read about coaching. And for us, we found that this combination of self-awareness through the report and making it easy for them to take action has been really powerful for us. And so how do we know if this is working? Once again, we turn to the data. And one thing we very carefully track at Google is our average satisfaction score of our managers across all our surveys. And we know that in 2010, our managers were scoring at 83%, and today they're at about 89%. And while we're always going to keep investing in managers and trying different things, this is one indicator to us that we're on the right track. But it's something we keep a very close eye on. It's something we care a lot about. And so what kinds of things might you want to be thinking about with managers in your own companies? I've been talking to some of you on breaks, and I know that some of you are in very small companies, and maybe you're just starting to think about having a manager. Others of you are much bigger, and you've had managers for a long time. So my advice is, no matter where you are, no matter what stage of your company, to think about that whole life cycle of the manager. So when you're hiring or you're promoting managers, think about the behaviors that you value in your company and ask them questions about those behaviors. Figure out how you want to assess them on those behaviors. When managers become managers, think about how to train them. So at Google, we like to train managers after they become a manager and been a manager for a little while. We've actually found about 2 to 6 weeks of being a manager is a sweet spot. So what we do when you become a new manager, we first send you an email, and we say, congratulations. We send you a bunch of things to read, including the 8 attributes, and we encourage them to sign up for a class. A few weeks later, we like them to come to our class, and the reason we like them to come to our class after they have managed for a little bit is they bring questions to the class. And they are highly motivated in that class to learn, because they've already started to see a couple things, and they're very interested in learning more. Now, you don't want to train them too late, because if you train them too late, they can actually do a little bit of damage. So you want to catch them right in that sweet spot. And just to kind of share with how we're constantly sort of iterating and launching, one idea that we're playing with right now is, how could you train a manager before they become a manager? And so one of the things that we see in our data is oftentimes before a manager starts managing the team, they'll manage an intern. So right now, we're looking at our intern training for next summer for all our managers of all those interns to say, can we beef up that manager-intern training and train them just like we train our other managers, so that later in their career, when they start managing a bigger team, they're more prepared. So training is a big thing to think about. And then lastly, think about feedback. So I shared the manager feedback survey. That's worked for us, but I encourage you in your own cultures and in your own companies to think about what might work for you to help give your managers some more feedback. We've found giving managers that sense of self-awareness has been really critical to their improvement. So hiring, training, feedback, those are all things to think about. And like on the hiring session, all of this work is posted in free guides on our rework site. We've posted those 8 attributes. We have our new manager training posted there, and we've also posted our manager feedback survey, which you can customize and use in your own companies. So it's our hope that today, by sharing some of our practices, that it helps you, our partners, think about what behaviors and attributes you value in your own managers and how you might want to help support them. We know that having a great manager is often a defining moment in someone's career. And it just sort of makes me wonder, what if everyone had that opportunity to have a great or even an awesome manager? So that's the end of my presentation, and with that, we move into a Q&A session, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Sure.
Kind of moving managers forward.
Yes.
And improving on their manager skills.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that in some cases, some people are stuck and it's impossible to move them out of their bad habits and be a better coach? So you send them to a course on being a better coach. How do you approach kind of people stuck? Do you just say fired?
Yeah.
Do you kind of,
Yep.
Great
question. So he's asking, what happens when a manager is stuck? And what I'd say is, we first assume positive intent, and we try to help them, get them to a course. One of the things that we do is, we know when we look at those manager feedback survey reports that sometimes there's a reason why a manager is struggling. Like maybe they're having to take the team through a reorg, or there's like some tough things happening on the team, so we kind of give them a chance. And we say, look, here's how I can help you as a human resources professional, here's a class you can take, here's some things you can do, and we give them a chance. One of the things that we do in the data is we look for what we call serial low-scoring managers. So if you score low on this report 2, 3, 4 cycles in a row, then that's a pretty big signal something's really wrong. And then we get in there more seriously and say, one more chance. But if you can't turn it around, then it's time for you not to be a manager anymore. And we do have a % of managers that happens to. We kind of call it, you need the will and the skill, and if they can't follow through on it through the training, then we'll help them get into what we call an individual contributor track.
So, follow-up question to that.
Yep.
Is that difficult to keep the person in the organization if they're kind of going backwards?
Yeah.
Kind of take a step back.
Yeah.
Do you find those employees to be disgruntled, or do you find them?
It depends, because, yeah.
It seems hard,
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is that hard for the individual? It depends, because I'll tell you, in some of the more engineering organizations, sometimes they'd rather be on the technical individual track. So it does highly depend on the function, I would say that. And I'd say sometimes people just prefer, and the way we kind of get them there is they'll be happier. So when they're not doing well as a manager, they know it. The team knows it. It's like a pretty big struggle. So by the time we reach that decision, oftentimes it's like, look, there's this other track, and then they go into that, and they're happier, and the team's happier. But yeah, it does happen sometimes. Yeah, sure, you.
First of all, thank you for sharing all this great information. So question for you, what have you found to be the most effective method for training your managers? Is it in classroom? Is it giving them materials to read? Is it sending them to trainings and seminars? Is it mentoring? Can you give some light to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of our best ways is to do an all-day training with these new managers. One of the things that we found to be the most useful is to have a really great manager come in and we do a cameo in the training. And we find in those courses, when a great manager comes to visit, those courses score 10 points higher. And the reason they score 10 points higher is that manager shares the view in the trenches. And they're like, look guys, here's a mistake I made, don't make it. And they go through real life situations, and it's just sort of different, a different field than HR saying, hey, here's what you should know and do. So I'd say training and bringing in your better managers to help train them has been some of our best stuff. We're trying to do a little bit more with online and reading articles and that kind of thing just so we can scale. But kind of the in-classroom where you can role play has been one of the better pieces for us. Yep.
Do you all at Google have a rule of thumb for a specific number of direct reports per manager?
Honestly, not really. So the question is, do you have a rule of thumb for the number of reports? We like to say that around 5 to 7 is like the sweet spot, much less, and you don't get a lot of scale, and too many, and you can't have those one-on-one meetings. So 5 to 7 is mostly the sweet spot. It's a great question. How do you decide who to promote to be a manager? So if you were in the hiring or in Prasad's talk, you might have heard a little bit about those committees. And so when we look at promotions, committees review information about the manager, or potential manager. And so one of the things we look at is what information is it that we have based on how they're doing on those 8 attributes. And a committee will generally decide. Yep.
Hi.
Hello.
I have a question because it's very similar to the previous question.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there are like 3 or more people that seems to fit for the promotion for be a manager, to become a manager.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a way to prepare someone before make the promotion? Or
Yeah.
how do you decide it's similar?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we get this question a lot, especially from our junior employees who want to eventually be a manager. We even have a talk at Google called "So You Want to Be a Manager," and one of the things we advise those employees is think like a leader, be a leader, mentor someone. Volunteer to either be an intern's manager or be that intern's buddy. Like all these behaviors, coaching, expressing interest, that kind of thing, you can do with your colleagues. So if you're on a project, you can step up as a leader on a project. So one of the things that list gives us is this set of things that people can look at and try to do. So I hope that helps.
Hi. Slightly different way of looking at what you're saying, because everything you said has been great. I run a small team of 10 people
Yep.
with 1 manager.
Yep.
So I think all of those things are very useful to look at him and guide him. But how do I know if I'm doing a good job as their overall leader? And how much of this can you apply to yourself? And how do you actually measure that?
You mean an individual contributor or the managers?
Yeah, so I have a team of 10 people. I'm the director. Then I have an assistant manager who runs the rest of the team. But just as much as I'm reviewing him as the manager of everyone else, how do I apply that to myself to make sure I'm being a good overall division leader?
Director, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So the question is, he has managers under him, but how does he make sure that the indirect reports, is what we would call it, think highly of him as the managing director? A couple of things we do is we have an annual survey called Google Geist. We call it that because it's kind of like the sign of the times at Google. And we actually ask about your manager and your director and your VP in a few chains in the management chain. And we do that so that you can get a little report on how you're doing. And for the leaders, we ask them more questions about, does he have a vision? Does she make good decisions? And things like that. That's one tack we do. We also have other ways to get feedback called real-time feedback. So it's a way just to send 10 people an anonymous survey question and they can respond. So I'll give you an example. I had an on-site a few weeks ago and I just sent it to my team and said, how was that on-site? What did you like and what can we improve? So there are some ways like that through online surveys where you could get a little feedback. The other thing is we also strongly encourage people just to ask, just to have one-on-ones with some of your indirect reports and ask them how you think you're doing.
So thanks for that. So just for example, then, that list of 8 things that you had, you could just send that as a survey to the whole team
That's right.
And say fill it out anonymously about both the director and your immediate line manager.
That's right. That's
And
exactly
then just
right.
make a scoring system or something.
That's right. You could send
Okay.
that. It's kind of like agree, disagree scale. And I'd encourage you to think about what behaviors you value at your company, right? So this is our list, and you're welcome to it, but you could also edit it, revise it, change it to fit your own culture, for sure. Yeah, great question.
Hi. How do you set objectives to improve like attitude, like a behavior, positive attitude, where the skill is there, but like a positive approach to like management is not there, and that's what's missing?
Okay, so the question is, how do you get people to change their behavior if maybe they kind of have a bad attitude?
Yeah.
Is that like a little bit of
Yeah.
summary? Yeah, interesting question. Here's one thing we do. So because we so strongly encourage managers to share those reports with the teams, a lot of managers do share it. And it's actually kind of unusual for them not to share it. And once they've shared it, the team has access to how you're doing. And so managers are actually pretty motivated to improve because 6 months later, they know they're going to get another report. So if they're kind of in the toilet for one report, they're pretty motivated to do something so the next report doesn't look so bad. And so this kind of regular interval of giving these reports helps with that a little bit. If they have a terrible attitude and they score low time and time again and they won't improve, then we get into sort of what we talked about earlier where HR steps in and we're like, look, this isn't really working out, and I think you should try going on this different track.
Sure. Do you think that, it's kind of a follow-up to that last question, that feedback works for like smaller teams as well? So we've got like 25 and there's 3-4 managers. Do you think that the feedback, it works just as well on a smaller team as it does on like larger teams?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think feedback is the key to all of this, and it's actually kind of tough to ask someone for feedback, which is why these regular interviews help. So we have examples of just engineering managers who just didn't have self-awareness. They actually thought that they should be the team's best friend, and once they got the first report, they're like, whoa, I guess they don't want that. So yeah, asking for feedback we found is really key.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I have 2 pretty quick questions.
Sure.
One, the process you described for you send an email to someone and say, hey, congratulations, your manager, welcome. Go play around for a couple of weeks and then come take some training. Does that process, is that the same if you bring someone into the company as a people manager, but they've never worked there before?
Yeah, so his question is, you send this email that says, congratulations, you became a manager. Do you do it the same way as if you hire? We actually have 2 different tracks. So if you're hired in as a manager, we put you in training right away. And we tell you how managing is a little different at Google. I'd say that for 1. For 2, I'd say we are pretty careful with that email, and we don't say kind of play around, but we make it a little more like, look, congratulations, this is a big deal. Here's what you need to start doing, and we have high expectations of you, and your team is counting on you. And we really kind of play that up a little bit in that email.
So when you guys are doing this feedback from the team, and you're sharing it with the manager, you mentioned that you need 3 people to respond to it before you share it. How did you guys end up with 3?
It's a great question. Initially, we started with 5, actually, to really protect the team. So it is anonymous, so you can't attach it to an individual, because we wanted to be very protective. And we found that there wasn't that much to be concerned about. There wasn't retribution or different things. And we found if we took it down to 3, and we did some pilots first, and we found it worked. And now that we take it down to 3, we can send out reports to a much bigger list of managers that have these small teams. And some of those managers of small teams actually need it the most because they're in the early stage of managing. So it works for us. But we would never take it lower than 3 because you do want to be careful of that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yep, good question.
Hi. I have been a manager for the company I work at for 2.5 years. And when I entered the company, I had 2 main goals. One was to take this really traditional company to a digital stage, and 2, work on culture, because sometimes mission and values and those things end up looking really nice at a presentation, but people don't actually live it, or managers don't actually make people live it. So my question is, if you have a clear culture of the kind of people you want at your company, really clear values like freedom and responsibility. We are not going to check on the time you arrive at the office. We are not. It's not a control culture, but it's a responsible culture. How do you make all the people inside a company actually live that culture? And if I mean, there's no right or wrong culture. It's like, how do you make people live those values? Like.
Okay, so I kind of hear in your question, if you have certain cultural values like freedom, how do you help make those values come alive? Is that
come alive? Like, not every day in everything we do.
Yeah. So,
how do we install that?
So it's a great question, and I would say it starts at the top. So you set the tone at the top with how the leaders treat people. So do the leaders lock down the cabinets with the office supplies? I mean, I think we forget that employees take their cues from everyday things that happen.
Lead by example.
So I'd say the leaders have to set the tone at the top, and managers can be a huge lever. So if you want people treated a certain way, how do you train the managers on what you expect? And for us, like laying out the 8 behaviors makes it really clear. Like we just have so many engineers, and they just want to see it like laid out very clearly. And once you do that, then they can try to match your expectations. So I'd say it starts at the top, your managers can help, and then help find ways to communicate that in small ways to your employees.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. How are we doing on time? Okay, I can take a few more questions, and then you can go to break. Yep, hi.
Yeah, so I work in a smaller agency where
sure.
a lot of my time is actually spent working for my clients as well as managing teams. How do you guys have that at Google, and how do you really encourage managers to take time to really help their work?
Yeah. So it's a great question. She's saying she's in a small agency and she manages, but she also is busy. I'd say we definitely have that all over the place, busy managers. And so one of the things that we encourage them to do is just think really carefully about your time. And so, sounds obvious, but what I mean by that is have one-on-one meetings, but maybe you have them every other week during your heavy sales periods or marketing periods. When it comes time to the performance review, you set aside an hour for that person and you dig deep. But in the other weeks, you kind of go shallow or you just have a quick 15-minute check-in. So that's one of the things we advise. And then the other thing we say is just the little things you can do for your team can go a long way. So one of the behaviors is about expressing interest. And we've talked with engineering managers. They're like, of course I care about the team. And I'm like, okay, of course you care, but how do they know you care? So even just learning spouses' names, girlfriends' names, the cat's name, and you ask them, how is Philip doing in school? That makes a big difference. Rather than, hey, don't you have a son or something? I don't know. So I think there's many little ways where you can send a quick email or see them in the hall that can make a big difference and show people that you care and see them as a whole person.
I have 2 quick questions. So on the one hand, and it kind of relates to some of the questions early on, if you start to identify some senior individual contributors that the next natural progression would be a manager, but you're starting to think that they might not have what it takes to be a manager or might not want to be a manager, how do you foster that through the company?
We have more what we call individual tracks in the technical areas. So in our technical, like in an engineering area, we do have a track where you can keep moving up. You have to demonstrate a great deal of technical expertise and mentoring of other people, but we do have that track. And I actually think that track is important so that people aren't forced to be a manager if they don't want to.
But in most areas that aren't technical, the general progression is management, and if you don't have those skill sets, it can be an issue.
It can. I'll just be honest. It can. Okay. So in other areas, like more like a marketing or a finance or other places, it's true that in order to move up, you need to gain those skills to be a people manager.
Okay, so on that front, and my other question, at what point in the hiring process do you start interviewing for management skill sets all the way at the intern level, and how do you do that differently?
So we have one of our attributes that you might have heard about in the hiring talk is leadership. And so even if you're a junior employee, we look for examples when you're in college of stepping up as a leader, all the way up to like our top SVP who we interview. So we do ask everyone about leadership. If we are interviewing you for a people manager job, we actually ask you questions on these 8 attributes. So we say, like, tell me about a time that you coached, and hopefully they know what that means, and they have some examples of helping some employees.
Cool.
Yes. Okay. Good questions. Sure.
I would say one of my most challenging aspects these days is generational management and also generational identification. Like having a Gen X or even more so a millennial maybe manage a Gen X.
Yeah.
What kind of data do you have or experience?
Yeah. So the question is sort of about managing different generations. It's a fair question. I think something that we see sometimes in the younger generations is just this huge eagerness. Like we had a younger employee last month who was like, I have to learn something every day. And I was like, every day? Like, sometimes we just need to like get the presentation done. So I do think that there are some generational differences. I mean, honestly, we typically take our managers, I'm just going to be honest, back to the 8 behaviors and say everyone's different. When you coach, you need to tailor your coaching style to that individual, where they're at in their career, what motivates them. Take time to get to know them. Here's some questions you can ask to get to know them. And that's how we sort of train our managers to deal with. It's not just generational, but many different aspects of what might motivate an employee. But we don't over-focus on the generational thing. It's a little bit more like everyone's an individual is how we treat it. I think that's pretty good. The questions are kind of slowing down, so what I'd say is I'm available. So if you have other questions, I'm happy to chat. And there is a lot posted on Rework, or you can happy to reach out to me individually, and I'm happy to help. Thanks again for attending.